need another SPD if the equipment you are protecting is more than 10 metres away from the consumer unit. Let's use a fire alarm panel as an example because it highlights exactly where this question comes from. The consumer unit is fitted with a Type 2 SPD. A dedicated circuit leaves the board, runs through the building and eventually arrives at the fire alarm panel, perhaps 15 or 20 metres away. Most electricians would look at that and think that the panel is protected. After all, the SPD is fitted at the origin of the circuit, so surely anything connected to that circuit is protected as well. But when you open a modern fire alarm panel, you are not looking at cable terminals. You are looking at processors, communication boards, power supplies and monitoring electronics. The very things that make modern fire alarm systems so capable are also the things that make them sensitive to transient over voltages. That is why BS 7671 does not simply ask whether a surge event could occur. Regulation 443.4 asks us to consider the consequence if it does occur. Would it interrupt an important service? Would it create financial loss? Could it affect safety? A fire alarm system sits firmly in that conversation. In fact, IET guidance specifically refers to fire detection systems when discussing equipment that should be protected from transient over voltages. So the question is not really whether the consumer unit has an SPD fitted, the question is whether the fire alarm panel itself is adequately protected. That distinction is important because the SPD is installed at one end of the circuit, while the equipment we care about is installed at the other. Between the two is a length of cable, and during a transient event, that cable becomes part of the electrical system we are trying to protect. This is where the 10 metre discussion comes from. Not because surge protection suddenly stops working after a certain distance, but because the further the sensitive equipment is from the SPD, the more important it becomes to consider what voltage may still appear at the equipment terminals. And that does not mean the Type 2 SPD has failed, it means the Type 2 SPD is doing the job it was designed to do, which is reducing transient over voltages within the installation. But protecting the installation and protecting sensitive electronics are not always exactly the same thing. That is why 534 of BS 7671 talks about the coordination of SPDs. The objective is not simply to fit a device at the origin and forget about the rest of the installation. The objective is to ensure the equipment being protected sees a voltage it can withstand. And that is where Type 3 SPDs come in. A Type 3 SPD is installed close to the equipment itself. In this case, close to the fire alarm panel. The Type 2 SPD deals with the larger transient event at the distribution point, while the Type 3 SPD provides a final layer of protection at the equipment. The two devices are performing different roles as part of the same protective strategy. The location of that Type 3 SPD matters as well. During a transient event, conductor lengths affect the voltage that can appear at the equipment. The closer the SPD is to the electronics being protected, the more effectively it can limit that voltage. That makes a fire alarm panel a very good application for a Type 3 SPD. The CPN Cudis Type 3 SPD has been designed specifically for sensitive equipment such as alarm panels and can be installed in confined spaces, including trunking and panel enclosures. So rather than adding another distribution board or trying to redesign part of the installation, protection can be placed exactly where it is needed, right next to or in the equipment. And it's not just alarm panels. Server racks, computer bays or any equipment that is vulnerable to transient over voltages are all at risk. This little unit can be installed in the back of sockets, switch fuse spurs or directly into the equipment to give it that Type 3 protection in coordination with the Type 2 at the board. And how do you know if this SPD is activated during a surge event and needs replacing? Well, it has a buzzer built into the device, which I can only imagine will get annoying after a while. So you can swap out the device and know that the sensitive equipment is still going to function. So if a fire alarm panel is more than 10 meters away from the consumer unit, do you automatically need another Type 2 SPD? No. Do you automatically need another distribution board? No. What you do need to consider is whether the sensitive equipment at that end of the circuit is adequately protected from transient over voltages. And when that equipment is sensitive, like fire alarm panels, a locally installed Type 3 SPD may be the most appropriate way of providing that final layer of protection. If you'd like to learn more about surge protection and circuit protection, Joe Robinson did a full CPD on this very subject. Hit the video on screen now to find out more.